Hello, and welcome to the first session of Following the Money, the video recording series for providing residents a solid foundation of knowledge for understanding the City of Sausalito's budget process and the 2015-16 adopted budget. Today's session will focus on what is the city budget, why is it needed, and how is it structured. Let's begin, though, by telling you who I am. My name is Charlie Francis, and I am the city's Administrative Services Director and Treasurer. That means I wear several hats. First, I am the Finance Director, the equivalent of a corporate Chief Financial Officer who reports to the CEO. In my case, I report to the City Manager. Here's my contact information, and I am always available to answer any questions that you might have. Please feel free to call or email me, or just drop by City Hall, and we can chat face-to-face. I have a passion for Sausalito's financial condition, and I would love to tell you all about the wonderful Sausalito fiscal story. What does a finance director do? Primarily, I oversee the city's financial affairs, including accounting, debt and investment management, procurement and purchasing, budget development, and financial reporting. As the Administrative Services Director, I also manage the IT and HR functions of the city. In case you are interested, according to the Myers-Briggs Indicator Personality Test, I am an ISTJ, which means I am an introverted, sensor, and an extroverted thinker. What does that mean for you? Well, ISTJs are typically capable, logical, reasonable, and effective individuals with a deeply driven desire to promote security and peaceful living. And that definition of me begins to answer the first question of what is a city budget. Before city budgeting occurs, there is a strategic plan. Strategic planning is important. Why? Because the world is in a constant state of change. There are radical changes in government economics as we move from producing goods to a delivering services economy. Tax laws were developed in an economy of manufacturing, and these outdated tax laws are not only holding the U.S. economy back, they are ominously impacting local government resources. Recently, there have been government deficits, and even as we emerge from the worst recession since the Great Depression, the biggest deficit of all is the deficit in public trust. Simultaneously, there is less willingness to pay taxes, and at the same time, there are more demands for service, kind of a disconnect in reality. So the city must have clearly defined and accepted statements of the organization's purpose that specifically state where the organization wants to be in the future. And finally, the city must strategically have a plan that holds public officials accountable to accomplish the specific annual budget objectives. Now, coming back to promoting security and peaceful living, we find that they are embedded in the City of Sausalito's vision statement. Security, safe, and quality of life, thriving, friendly community. And reflected in this 5 strategic city plan goals, number 1 goal is fiscal resiliency. So peace, safe, fiscal resilient are all integrated into the key city processes that move from a strategic plan through community projects, staff projects, new ordinances. Those inputs all feed into the allocation of resources, the workforce, the money, technology, equipment, space, and real estate. All those resources are used to accomplish goals and objectives, those goals and objectives being promote security and peaceful living. Now we're ready to answer the question, what is a city budget? The origin of the word budget is from the Old French word budget, diminutive of bouge, which means leather bag, or purse. And it's where we get the phrases from purse strings. To hold the purse strings, for example. The city finance director holds the purse strings here, means the finance director controls the spending of the city's money. To loosen the purse strings would be an example of, we should expect the finance director to loosen the purse strings in this year's budget, which would mean to allow more money to be spent. or to tighten the purse strings. If we're going to weather the recession, we need to tighten the purse strings a bit. In other words, to reduce the amount of money that can be spent. So the city is required by law to adopt its budget each year, and that becomes the spending plan, or the legal authority to spend public money. Another name for a budget is the resource allocation plan, and it's where the city forecasts its revenues and it forecasts its expenditures on levels of service, activities that the city is going to accomplish during the year, and what capital assets or infrastructure it's going to invest in. Because the city allocates its scarce resources to programs and services through the budget process, it is one of the most important activities undertaken by the city. As the focal point for key resource decisions, the budget process is a powerful tool. And that's why the Sausalito's budget process is integrated with all our other strategic planning activities of the city. Provide better financial and program decision, and it leads to improved government operations. A good budget process is characterized by several essential features. A good budget process should incorporate long-term perspectives, establish linkages to broad organizational goals, focus budget decisions on results and outcomes, involve and promote effective communication with stakeholders, and provide incentives to government management and employees. These characteristics of good budget make clear that the budget process is not simply an exercise in balancing revenues and expenditures one year at a time, but is strategic in nature, encompassing a multi-year financial and operating plan that allocates resources on the basis of identified goals. A good budget process moves beyond the traditional concept of line item expenditure control, providing incentives and flexibility to managers that can lead to improved program efficiency and effectiveness. The mission statement of a budget identifies the central goal of the budget process. It incorporates both political and managerial aspects, as well as a responsibility to report and account for the provision of services and use of resources. Communication and involvement with citizens and other stakeholders is stressed. The broad nature of the mission allows issues to be addressed that have limited the success of budgeting in the past. Just like a business company or corporation is not likely to remain in business if it does not stay in touch with its customers, governments that are not in touch and do not have involved citizens, well, they may remain in business, but the results are often not pleasant for citizens or the government. Apathy is a serious illness of government. It is in the best interest of government to have involved stakeholders. The importance of this aspect cannot be overstated. Regular and freeing reporting is necessary to improve accountability, transparency, educate and inform stakeholders, and improve their confidence in the government. Communication and involvement is an essential component of every aspect of the budget process. It is why this series on budget is so very important, and it's why our tool, OpenGov, that allows citizens to drill right in and see the city's finances at any given point in time, is so very important. And these are just two of many mechanisms that the city uses to engage stakeholders in the budget development process, as the picture here shows. Historically, the city published a traditional line item budget. Although easy to use and understandable, line item budgets focus attention and thought on how many dollars are being spent. Although that approach is important, and it's still necessary as basic budget building and accounting, contemporary governmental budgeting wants to present budget documents so that policymakers concentrate on decisions about levels of service and how community priorities are being addressed. And that's why the City of Sausalito has now adopted a performance budget. Through the use of department and programmatic descriptions, listings of duties, and presentation of certain performance indicators, this budget document shifts attention from the means of accomplishments to the accomplishments themselves. This type of budget clearly defines the linkages between the planning and results. Performance measures can affect the budget justification phase and allocation process, and these determine the allocation of funds for specific organizational issues. It requires an assessment of the service impact on the jurisdiction. Provides opportunity to conduct analysis to determine the impact of funding increases or reductions, provides concrete data to support recommendations or add a new service or eliminate a non-value-added service, and it serves as a guide in evaluating alternatives. We're about ready to conclude today's series with a discussion on the complexity of multi-fund budgeting. You know, the city's budget really, though, it's not that complex. It has two main components. It has the general fund and all other funds, or we call them non-general funds. So in order to fully understand how the city finances its projects and programs, it is important to know the difference between them. Let's start with general fund revenues. This is where property taxes, sales tax, transient occupancy taxes, along with business license tax, are all deposited in the general fund. Franchise fees, building and permit fees, and all the other revenues are comprised largely of discretionary funds, since the City Council can allocate these funds to programs and services in any area. In other words, there are few restrictions on how these resources may be allocated. General fund expenses are the dollars used to support such city services, such as police, library, recreation, as well as planning and community development. As police and are generally spent on current operating type expenses, such as salaries, benefits for all the city workers, and other operating expenses. Salaries, benefits. All the other funds, in other words, the non-general funds, they are often referred to as dedicated funds, or non-discretionary monies like grants and donations, contract revenues, revenues from services, revenues specifically dedicated for a particular purpose. For example, sewer fees may only be used to support the delivery of sewer collection services and infrastructure, but they may not be used to support programs or services funded from discretionary resources like police or recreation. Likewise, gas taxes coming from the state of California may only be used to support street projects and operations. Gas taxes are placed in our special revenue funds. Sewer fees are placed in our enterprise funds. The large project like the public safety building was funded by general obligation bonds. And these general obligation bonds that were used on this project could not have been used for any other kind of project, only for the public safety. So that's one way of looking at discretionary and non-discretionary. To understand the difference between general and non-general funds, take a look at the stub of your paycheck. There you will see a total for your gross earnings or your revenue. However, your actual paycheck is somewhat less. Taxes, Social Security, medical, workers' compensation are all deducted from your total revenue and directed elsewhere. Those deductions represent your non-discretionary dollars. They're dedicated and unavailable for you to use now as you would please, but they're still part of your gross revenue. Your net paycheck, on the other hand, represents your own personal general fund, which is largely at your discretion to spend. But let's go a bit further. Let's look at the analogy for understanding the difference between discretionary and non-discretionary within your personal general fund, your own checkbook. Some funds in your checking account may be non-discretionary. For example, if you have money taking out or automatically withdrawn to pay your car payment or certain other bills, or or funds automatically taken out and transferred to a savings account, those funds could be called non-discretionary or dedicated funds. They aren't available to pay for other expenses as you choose. On the other hand, any funds remaining in your checking account after those automatic withdrawals are made would be similar to general fund discretionary dollars. You can use them as your discretion to pay for expenses as you choose. You may have obligations or plans for the discretionary dollars in your checking account, such as paying bills or making a special purchase. Similarly, the City Council may have ongoing programs such as police, recreation, library that it wishes to fund, or special one-time purchases it wishes to make. But like you, the Council can only do these things with general fund discretionary dollars. So what is a budget? Budget is the legal authority to spend money. It allocates resources, and it defines levels of service, as well as acquisition of capital assets, and it is one of the most important activities undertaken by a city. That concludes today's video recording. Next week, we will present a session on how to use the city's transparency tool, OpenGov. As always, contact me with your questions or your comments. I look forward to speaking with you again next week.